For almost 700 years, two of the ancient world's biggest superpowers, Rome and Persia, were locks in a rivalry that just seemed to never end. We're talking about one of the longest, most brutal conflicts in all of human history, a war that defined an entire era and left behind a mystery that historians are still trying to solve. And that's the real puzzle, isn't it? Rome, the empire that basically steamrolled its way across the known world, just stopped. You had emperors from Crassus all the way to Trajan throw everything they had at Persia, but none of them could pull off a lasting victory, not like Alexander the Great did centuries before. So, what made Persia so different? What was their secret? For a long time, the answer seemed pretty straightforward. You picture Roman legions clashing with Persia's awesome heavy cavalry, the Cataphracts, out in the desert. It was just a military problem, right? A contest of strength. Yeah, the traditional thinking from historians like Edward Luttwak is that Rome's grand strategy just wasn't up to the task here, that it basically buckled under its own weight. But that might not be the whole story. What if the real reasons this war went on for so long had nothing to do with what happened on the battlefield? What if it was something else entirely? To really get to the bottom of this, we have to do something kind of weird. We have to completely forget our modern idea of a border, a clean line on a map. For these ancient empires, the whole concept of a frontier was something totally different. And this brings us to two big competing ideas. On one side, you've got Luttwak's theory. Rome's ambition just failed. But on the other, you have a newer theory from historian C.R. Whitaker, and he argues that the frontier didn't fail at all. In fact, it stopped exactly where it was supposed to, creating this kind of natural balance. The Romans actually had a word for this, the limites. Now, don't think of this as a wall or a fence. Think of it more like a zone, a region where Roman power and influence kind of faded out instead of just stopping cold. It was a place where people were constantly interacting, trading, and, fighting. And when I say it was a fuzzy frontier, I mean it was really fuzzy. You'd find Roman forts on both sides of a river. You'd find client kings who were loyal to Rome, ruling way deep in what we would call enemy territory. Farmers and workers crossed back and forth all the time. The Roman forts weren't there to mark an edge. Their main job was just to protect the vital supply roads inside this shared zone. And this brings us to Whitaker's key idea, the periphery. He basically splits this frontier zone in two. You have the inner frontier, which is the area an empire could actually control for the long haul. Supply its armies, collect taxes, keep the peace. But then there's the outer frontier. That's where they could project their power. They could raid it, they could install a friendly king, but they could never, ever hope to hold it. And this is where it all starts to click, because empires aren't just built on how tough their armies are. They're built on the boring, unglamorous, but absolutely crucial realities of logistics and money. Okay, just think about this number for a second. For the Parthian Empire, that's Persia, a single big military campaign could cost 125% of its entire annual income. I mean, this wasn't just expensive, this was a bet the farm kind of gamble. Going to war was an all-or-nothing situation. So you see, the real walls, the real barriers to conquest, they weren't made of stone. They were the simple facts of geography. Could you get supplies to your army on a river? They were the absolutely crushing costs of trying to move supplies over land. And they were human. How long would a conquered population put up with an occupying army bleeding them dry? And in this crazy frontier zone, both empires were playing a surprisingly similar game of influence. Rome would take Persian princes back home as guests, raise them as Romans, and then try to put them back on the throne as puppet kings. Meanwhile, Parthia used its own network of friendly kingdoms and its control of the vital river trade to push its own influence. It was a symmetrical game of power, played miles away from any battlefield. Now, all of this theory is great, but let's put it to the test with a real-world case study, the campaign of Emperor Trajan. This was Rome's biggest, most ambitious shot at finally breaking Persia for good. And on paper, wow, it was a spectacular success. Trajan just barrels down the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, he captures the capital city, Ctesiphon, he even makes it all the way to the Persian Gulf. It looked like a replay of Alexander the Great. But then, almost immediately, the whole thing starts to fall apart. Revolts just pop up everywhere, and in less than a year, the legions were in full retreat. So that's the big question, right? Trajan did everything right militarily. He won every single major battle. So why on earth did he lose the war? Well, the answer is in everything we've just been talking about. The Roman logistical periphery was stretched way past its breaking point. Capturing the capital city didn't matter as much as he thought, because Parthian power was spread out, it was decentralized. Pushing any further would have meant crossing the Zagros Mountains, which was a logistical nightmare. And maybe most importantly, the local people just refused to accept the economic burden of having a Roman army camped on their doorstep. So, what does this all mean for our 700-year war? Well, it means we can finally see this conflict for what it really was. Not a simple military failure, but something way more complex and way more interesting. In the end, this epic, centuries-long struggle wasn't decided by brilliant generals or better-trained soldiers. It was dictated by things they couldn't change: the unforgiving realities of geography, the brutal math of logistics, and the cold, hard facts of economics. The two empires were eternal enemies, not because they couldn't beat each other, but because a stalemate was actually the most stable, the most natural solution. Each empire pushed right up to the point where it just wasn't profitable or sustainable to go any further. And right there, at the edge of their logistical reach, they found a balance, an equilibrium born out of mutual limitation. And that leaves us with a pretty powerful thought for today. When we look at conflicts around the world, how many of them that seem like military stalemates are actually something else? How many are just echoes of this ancient balance, dictated not by armies on a battlefield, but by those same invisible barriers of logistics, economics, and sustainability?